For years, the world treated Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones like a finished story. Two Oscar-winning names, two flawless smiles, two hands clasped on red carpets, as if nothing in life could ever reach them. That is what the cameras sold. That is what the magazines repeated. And that is what most people still believe, because belief is easier than looking behind the light. But the transcript you shared opens with a different claim, almost like a man speaking from the edge of old age. He says he's been silent for 2 decades, and now, at 80, he is no longer afraid of public opinion, tabloids, or even himself. He does not speak to be praised. He speaks, he says, to free himself. That framing matters. It does not begin with evidence. It begins with a mood, exhaustion, confession, and the threat of a truth the public is not ready to hear. The story paints their marriage as a golden cage, beautiful on the outside, suffocating on the inside. It asks questions designed to pull the listener into their own fears. Have you ever lain next to the person you love and still felt completely alone? Have you ever woken in the night and wondered if what you call love is actually control? These questions are not random. They turn a celebrity relationship into a mirror. They make the viewer feel implicated before the plot even starts. Then the narrative takes aim at the illusion itself. The red carpet smiles become a curtain. The speeches become performances. The flashing cameras become cover for a loneliness that allegedly grew in the same house where glamour lived. The transcript suggests the cracks were not loud at first. They were small, ordinary, almost invisible. A late-night call that sounded less like affection and more like interrogation. A suspicion that began as worry and slowly hardened into something colder. A sense that even in the same bed, two people could become strangers. But the real hook is the promise that the fairy tale was never safe. The transcript points to the shadows both people carried into the marriage. A powerful Hollywood legacy, a past that tabloids never let die, and a woman who, beneath her poise, feared being reduced to a supporting role in her husband's legend. It describes a relationship that began like fate, then became a test of endurance, as if love was not a feeling, but a trial you survived one night at a time. This is how the story positions itself, not as gossip, but as a confession about what fame does to intimacy. It is not saying, look how scandalous they are. It is saying, look how easy it is to become trapped in a life that looks perfect. And it ends its opening move with a challenge. Stay with me. Because what comes next may make you question whether any marriage is as safe as it appears when the cameras are watching. The story moves backward to explain how a marriage that looked indestructible could slowly begin to fracture. It returns to the moment when everything still felt unreal, when Michael Douglas was in his mid-50s and Catherine Zeta-Jones walked into his life like a promise rather than a complication. The transcript describes their first meeting as something almost mythic, set against the glow of a European film festival, champagne glasses never empty, laughter echoing through rooms where fame felt harmless. He was recovering from surgery, trying to pull himself away from habits the industry whispered about but never confronted. She appeared confident, luminous, and untouchable, yet carrying her own quiet doubts about belonging in a world that devoured women as easily as it celebrated them. The narrative insists this was not a calculated romance. It frames their connection as recognition between two wounded people who saw past each other's armor. When he famously joked that he would be the father of her children, the line is retold not as arrogance, but as instinct, something reckless yet strangely sincere. What followed, according to the transcript, was not a whirlwind of publicity, but an intense private bond built on long conversations, letters, and late-night phone calls that crossed oceans. Distance did not weaken the connection at first. It sharpened it. But even in this early phase, the seeds of future tension are quietly planted. The age gap is never ignored. He had already lived several lives, survived scandals, addictions, and the crushing weight of a legendary surname. She was still climbing, still fighting to be seen as more than a beautiful face. The transcript suggests that love blurred these differences at first, making them feel irrelevant. Yet it also hints that love does not erase imbalance. It only delays its consequences. Marriage arrives like a spectacle. Their wedding is described as a gathering of Hollywood royalty, a celebration that confirmed what the world already believed. This was the golden couple. Inside that ceremony, however, the transcript inserts a private vow, a quiet plea in Catherine's eyes not to let the world swallow what they were building. That moment becomes symbolic later, because it suggests she understood the danger before it fully revealed itself. The early years of marriage are painted as cinematic perfection. Travel, red carpets, shared success, hands held as if nothing else existed. Yet the transcript repeatedly returns to a subtle disturbance, a sense of pressure beneath the beauty. Success did not unite them as expected. It intensified everything. Two careers rising at once meant two egos, two schedules, two separate gravitational pulls. When one shone, the other inevitably felt dimmer, even if no one said it out loud. Motherhood becomes a turning point. The birth of their first child is described not only as joy, but as the moment Catherine voiced a fear that would haunt the marriage, the fear of being seen only as his wife. At the time, it sounded like insecurity easily dismissed with reassurance. In hindsight, the transcript treats it as prophecy. No matter how celebrated she became, his shadow was always larger, and the world insisted on measuring her through him. As the years pass, the transcript suggests the relationship shifted from passion to maintenance. Distance returned, this time not as romance, but as strain. Phone calls became shorter, questions sharper. Work schedules turned into excuses, and trust quietly eroded under the weight of old reputations that never truly disappeared. The story does not accuse anyone outright. Instead, it paints a portrait of two people slowly losing the ability to meet each other without fear. What makes this phase unsettling is its ordinariness. There is no single betrayal, no dramatic collapse. There are only small moments, repeated often enough to change the shape of love. A conversation that ends too soon. A doubt left unresolved. A silence that feels safer than honesty. According to the transcript, this was the beginning of the real horror. Not because something terrible happened, but because nothing did. And in that quiet space, the marriage began to drift toward a place neither of them yet had the courage to name. As the marriage moved deeper into the new millennium, the transcript shifts from romance to erosion. This is where the story stops feeling like a fairy tale with cracks and starts feeling like a slow psychological descent. According to the narrative, nothing dramatic announced the change. There was no single night where everything collapsed. Instead, it was a quiet accumulation of moments that no one else could see. Two people still sharing a home, still sharing children, still sharing headlines, but no longer sharing the same inner world. At the height of their professional success, the distance between them paradoxically widened. Catherine's career surged with Chicago, a role that demanded absolute physical and emotional commitment. Michael, at the same time, was cementing his status not just as an actor, but as a power figure behind the scenes. From the outside, it looked like balance. From the inside, the transcript describes imbalance becoming suffocating. When both lives are filled with pressure, neither has room to carry the other. The story emphasizes how suspicion quietly replaced trust. Late night calls no longer felt comforting. They felt investigative. Questions once asked out of care began to sound like accusations. The transcript suggests that Michael's past never truly stayed in the past, no matter how determined he was to move on. When someone marries a man long labeled as dangerous, charming, and unfaithful, history becomes a third presence in the marriage. It sleeps in a room even when nothing is happening. What makes this stage disturbing is how normalized the tension becomes. Arguments are described as small, almost trivial, yet emotionally exhausting. They fight not over betrayal or money, but over proximity, attention, and reassurance. He wants distance to feel safe. She wants closeness to feel secure. Each response triggers the other's fear. Over time, the transcript portrays a couple no longer arguing to be understood, but arguing to survive the day. Then the narrative turns sharply toward mental health, framing it as the moment the marriage stopped being a partnership and became a battlefield. Catherine's struggle with bipolar disorder is presented not as a revelation, but as a slow realization that something fundamental had shifted. The transcript does not sensationalize the diagnosis itself. Instead, it focuses on the emotional aftermath inside the home. Some days were bright and energetic. Others were closed doors, silence, and despair. The unpredictability of those cycles drained both people in different ways. Michael, according to the transcript, did not know how to respond. His instinct was control through calm, distance through silence. But silence, in this context, became cruelty without intention. Catherine interpreted as quiet as absence, as emotional abandonment disguised as patience. Words like, "You are only here because you are afraid of losing face," appear not as proven quotes, but as emotional truths the story wants the audience to feel. Whether spoken aloud or not, the sentiment defines this chapter. The transcript reaches a breaking point when illness enters the picture. Michael's cancer diagnosis is described as sudden, brutal, and transformative. One day the marriage is fragile. The next day, survival becomes the only priority. The narrative shifts into a caretaking dynamic that temporarily silences all other conflicts. Catherine becomes the anchor. Michael becomes the patient. The outside world watches in admiration as love appears to conquer everything. Inside the house, however, the transcript paints a different reality. Caretaking is shown as devotion with a cost. Watching someone you love fade under treatment does not make you stronger. It erodes you. Catherine's fear is not only of losing her husband, but of inheriting the entire weight of the family, the legacy, the public gaze. Michael's fear is not only death, but being reduced to weakness in front of the one person he believes he must never disappoint. When the illness passes and remission is announced, the world celebrates. Headlines declare victory. Photographs show smiles. Yet the transcript insists that this is where the marriage truly begins to collapse. Crisis had given them purpose. Survival had given them unity. Recovery gives them nothing but the truth they avoided for years. Two people standing in the same house, no longer distracted by emergency, forced to confront the emptiness that remained. The story describes post-illness life as haunting. Michael returns to work carrying depression he does not name. Catherine retreats inward, exhausted by years of emotional whiplash. The marriage becomes quiet again, but this time the silence is heavier. It is no longer avoidance. It is resignation. They know each other too well to pretend the old passion will return. They also know each other too deeply to walk away without consequence. This leads to the separation, described without drama. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a suitcase and a need to breathe. The transcript emphasizes how anticlimactic the moment feels. There is no heartbreak explosion, only emptiness. The marriage does not end in fire. It fades like a light slowly turned down. That, the story suggests, is the true horror. What follows is portrayed as a period of ghost-like existence. Michael wanders through familiar places feeling invisible. Catherine continues appearing in public, radiant but hollow. Even their children sense the fracture, asking simple questions that carry unbearable weight. The transcript uses one such moment to expose Michael's deepest regret. Not betrayal, not failure, but the realization that he had stopped making his wife laugh. This is where the narrative reframes the entire marriage. It was not destroyed by infidelity or hatred. It was undone by exhaustion, silence, and two people trying to survive without admitting how lost they were. The transcript prepares the audience for what comes next by making one thing clear. Whatever reconciliation follows will not be a return to love as it once was. It will be something quieter, darker, and far more complicated. Reconciliation, as the transcript presents it, does not arrive like redemption. It arrives like surrender. After the separation, there is no dramatic chase, no grand declaration of love, no cinematic moment where one realizes they cannot live without the other. Instead, there is time, empty days, quiet nights, and the slow understanding that distance does not automatically bring relief. It only removes the noise, leaving each person alone with what they tried not to face for years. Michael's loneliness during this period is described as disorienting rather than painful. He is not devastated. He is hollow. Familiar streets feel unfamiliar. Conversations feel thin. The life he once filled with work, admiration, and motion now feels like a shell that no longer protects him from himself. Catherine, from a distance, appears composed. She attends events. She smiles for cameras. Yet the transcript insists that her exhaustion is visible to anyone who looks closely enough. Strength becomes another performance, one she no longer has the energy to sustain. What draws them back together is not passion, but recognition. The transcript emphasizes a quiet truth. No one else understands their shared damage the way they do. Friends offer advice. The press offers narratives. None of it fits. When Michael asks himself whether he wants to win her back, the question feels wrong. You do not win someone who is already tired of being a prize. You either meet them as they are now, or you lose them forever. The letter becomes the turning point. Not a long apology, not an explanation, just a single sentence admitting belief in what they once had. The simplicity of it matters. It suggests that words have been overused for years to avoid truth. Now only honesty remains. Catherine's reply is equally restrained. She is not forgotten. That is all. Memory, not romance, becomes the bridge between them. When she returns, it is without promises. This detail is crucial. The transcript wants the audience to understand that reconciliation here is conditional, fragile, and deeply uncertain. They do not rebuild the marriage. They simply share space again. Mornings are quiet. Ritual replaces excitement. Coffee, plants, shared silence that no longer feels threatening, only tired. There is no fire, but there is also no war. Peace exists, but it is a subdued peace, shaped by everything they have lost. Yet even in this calm, the transcript introduces an uncomfortable truth. During the separation, Michael admits he tried to forget, not to betray, but to escape the weight of memory. The attempt fails, not because of loyalty, but because forgetting does not erase attachment. It only reveals how deeply someone is still present. This admission reframes him, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a man incapable of living without reflection. He does not seek another woman. He seeks a mirror that does not exist. Catherine's insight cuts deeper. She tells him that he loves the feeling of being loved more than the person offering it. The transcript treats this as a revelation that explains everything that came before. His silence, his distance, his inability to meet pain with vulnerability. Whether the line was ever spoken exactly this way does not matter to the story. It functions as diagnosis. It exposes the imbalance that shaped their marriage from the beginning. Publicly, the reconciliation is announced through images. Hand-holding, red carpets, headlines declaring they are back. Privately, the transcript insists nothing has been solved. They have not returned to happiness. They have returned to coexistence, to a shared understanding that leaving did not free them and staying will not save them. It will only allow them to age together instead of apart. The years that follow are described as reflective rather than dramatic. Regret surfaces not as self-pity, but as clarity. Michael admits his greatest mistake was not infidelity or ambition, but silence. Silence used as protection. Silence used as control. Silence used to avoid discomfort until discomfort became the marriage itself. Catherine, in contrast, is portrayed as someone who carried pain outwardly, whose breakdowns were visible and therefore judged. His breakdown, hidden behind composure, went unnoticed and untreated. The pandemic becomes an unexpected equalizer. With the world paused, the marriage loses its audience. No premieres, no interviews, no applause. Just two aging people confined to the same space, stripped of roles they once relied on. Catherine learns domestic routines. Michael learns stillness. They watch sunsets instead of themselves. The transcript frames this period as the first time they exist without pretending, because there is no one left to convince. In this stripped-down existence, something shifts. Not love as it once was, but honesty. They speak more directly. They ask questions without needing answers immediately. Silence still exists, but it no longer feels weaponized. It becomes neutral. The absence of noise allows memory to soften. Old letters resurface. Old fears are acknowledged without panic. The transcript makes a bold claim here. They did not survive because love conquered everything. They survived because they stopped demanding that love fix them. They allowed the marriage to break, burn, and change shape. And when they returned to each other, it was not as icons or lovers, but as two people who had seen each other at their worst and stayed anyway. This chapter ends not with certainty, but with acceptance. The marriage is no longer a fairy tale. It is no longer even a warning. It is a study in endurance, regret, and late honesty. Whatever comes next, the transcript suggests one thing is irreversible. The silence has been broken. And once broken, it can never again pretend to be love. By the time the transcript reaches its later years, the marriage is no longer framed as a question of love or separation. It becomes a question of identity. Who are two people when the roles that once defined them begin to fade? Michael is no longer the invincible leading man, moving effortlessly from set to set. Catherine is no longer the rising star fighting to be seen on her own terms. Age, illness, and time have stripped away the illusion that either of them can endlessly reinvent themselves through applause. What remains is quieter and far more unsettling. The transcript suggests that aging itself becomes a new kind of pressure. As Michael steps back from constant acting, he begins to confront something he had avoided for decades: stillness. Without scripts, without schedules, without the adrenaline of production, there is nothing left to distract him from his inner voice. And that voice is not kind. It asks questions he never wanted to answer. What was real? What was performance? How much of his marriage was lived for cameras rather than connection? Catherine, meanwhile, is portrayed as carrying a different burden. Her return to the screen later in life is framed not as a comeback, but as an act of courage. She fears comparison, not with other actresses, but with earlier versions of herself. The transcript treats this fear with sympathy. It suggests that she is no longer chasing approval. She is fighting invisibility. After years of being discussed primarily as someone's wife, illness survivor, or tabloid subject, she wants to be seen again as a complete person. This stage of their life introduces a rare balance. Not a quality of power, but a quality of vulnerability. Both have lost something they cannot recover. Youth, illusion, the certainty that love will always feel dramatic and consuming. What replaces it is a gentler form of companionship that does not pretend to be romantic in the traditional sense. They share memories no one else understands, pain no one else witnessed, survival no one else can measure. The transcript repeatedly returns to the idea that they did not save their marriage. They let it die and then chose to live with what remained. This distinction is crucial. It reframes endurance as honesty rather than victory. They're no longer trying to prove anything to the world. They're simply choosing not to abandon each other again. Regret surfaces here not as a cry for forgiveness, but as recognition. Michael admits that applause once defined happiness for him. Standing on stage, hearing the world respond, believing that admiration equaled worth. But the transcript insists that when the lights went out, applause offered no comfort. Catherine, in contrast, is portrayed as someone who always understood the cost of admiration. She knew how quickly it could turn into expectation, judgment, and silence. Their conversations in this period are described as simpler but heavier. Fewer words, more meaning. Questions asked without defense. Admissions made without urgency. There's an understanding that time is no longer endless. Every unresolved truth now carries weight. The transcript uses this awareness to explain why honesty finally becomes unavoidable. Not because they have learned better communication, but because there is no future left in pretending. One of the most striking elements in this chapter is the way the transcript reframes forgiveness. Forgiveness is not shown as a clean act, a moment of absolution. It is shown as fatigue with resentment. Holding anger requires energy they no longer have. Letting go becomes less about generosity and more about survival. The story also challenges the romantic ideal that lasting marriages are built on passion. Instead, it argues they are built on shared loss. Michael and Catherine are no longer bound by desire or ambition. They are bound by what they endured together. Illness, breakdown, public scrutiny, separation, return. These experiences create a language only they speak. As the transcript moves toward reflection, Michael's tone shifts from accusation to humility. He no longer positions himself as a man wronged by circumstances. He acknowledges his own failures with a clarity that did not exist earlier. Silence becomes his greatest regret. Silence used to protect pride. Silence used to avoid discomfort. Silence that allowed distance to grow until love had no room to breathe. Catherine, in these reflections, is no longer framed as fragile or volatile. She's framed as resilient. Someone who stayed not because she lacked strength to leave, but because she chose to face what staying required. The transcript suggests that her endurance forced Michael to confront himself in ways nothing else ever did. This part of the story does not seek sympathy. It seeks understanding. It asks the audience to reconsider what it means when a marriage survives. Survival does not mean happiness. It does not mean success. It means choosing familiarity over freedom, truth over illusion, and shared history over starting again with someone who knows nothing of your scars. By the end of this chapter, one idea is clear. Whatever their marriage is now, it is no longer a story from magazines or fairy tales. It is a private agreement between two people who have already lost everything they feared losing. And in that loss, they have found something unexpected. Not peace, not joy, but the courage to stop lying to themselves about what love really costs. As the story enters its final phase, the tone shifts from reflection to reckoning. At this point, the transcript is no longer trying to persuade the audience that the marriage was tragic or heroic. It is trying to explain why it had to change and why that change came so late. Michael's voice becomes quieter, almost instructional, as if the years have turned pain into something resembling understanding. What remains is not bitterness, but a deep awareness of how easily love can be damaged when fear goes unnamed. The transcript returns again and again to one word: silence. Silence as protection. Silence as control. Silence as avoidance. For most of his life, Michael believed silence was strength. He learned early that vulnerability invites judgment, and judgment in Hollywood can be fatal. So he mastered composure. He smiled, worked, endured, and waited for storms to pass. In his marriage, that same strategy became destructive. Silence did not calm conflict. It allowed it to rot. Catherine's perspective, as portrayed in the transcript, offers the counterpoint. She did not experience silence as peace. She experienced it as erasure. Each unspoken truth felt like a door closing. Each unanswered emotion felt like proof that her pain mattered less than appearances. The story suggests that many of their worst moments were not loud fights, but quiet rooms where nothing was said because saying something felt too dangerous. One of the most unsettling admissions in this section is the idea that Michael sometimes wished Catherine would leave, not because he did not love her, but because her staying forced him to confront himself. As long as she remained, he could not maintain the illusion that he was blameless. Her presence reflected his failures back at him. If she left, he could keep the story simple. This acknowledgement reframes endurance as courage. Catherine's decision to stay becomes an act that demanded far more strength than walking away. The transcript also addresses the myth of the strong man. For decades, Michael embodied a type of masculinity built on control, charm, and emotional distance. That identity worked on screen. It worked in public. But inside the marriage, it created an imbalance. Strength left no room for need. Confidence left no room for fear. When illness finally stripped him of those defenses, he was unprepared to meet his wife without the mask he had relied on his entire life. Aging becomes a teacher here. At 80, the narrator no longer speaks as a man defending his image. He speaks as someone who understands that time removes all disguises. There is no future version of himself to fix what he avoided. There is only now and the truth he carries. The transcript treats this realization as both freeing and terrifying. Freedom comes from honesty. Terror comes from recognizing how much time was wasted avoiding it. Forgiveness is revisited one final time, but not as a romantic ideal. Forgiveness is described as the deepest form of love precisely because it offers no reward. There is no guarantee of happiness afterward. There is no applause. There is only the choice to stop punishing each other for wounds that can no longer be undone. In this framing, forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without rage. The transcript ends this phase by broadening its message beyond one marriage. It turns outward, asking what lessons survive when the names are removed. It suggests that many relationships fail not because of betrayal, but because people are afraid to speak before silence becomes permanent. That fear is universal. Fame simply amplifies it. By this point, the marriage between Michael and Catherine is no longer the central subject. It becomes an example, a warning, a quiet confession about how easily love can be mistaken for endurance, and how often people confuse surviving together with living honestly together. The story does not claim they found peace. It claims they found truth. And according to the transcript, that truth arrived too late to restore what was lost, but just in time to stop the damage from continuing in silence. In the final movement of the story, everything becomes smaller and more intimate. There are no more accusations, no more dramatic turns, no more attempts to explain who is right or wrong. What remains is a man looking back over 8 decades of life, measuring success not by awards or endurance, but by the cost of what he refused to say when it mattered most. The transcript no longer speaks with urgency. It speaks with acceptance. Michael no longer presents himself as a victim of circumstance or fame. He admits something far more difficult. He lived too long inside a role he created for himself. The role of the charming, unbreakable man who could survive anything without showing fear. That role protected him in public, but it suffocated his marriage. Catherine, in this final reflection, is not described as a burden or a challenge. She is described as the one person who saw through the performance and stayed anyway. The story reframes their relationship one last time. It was never destroyed by scandal. It was reshaped by truth. Truth that arrived slowly, painfully, and far too late to preserve innocence. Love, as the transcript defines it now, is no longer passion or certainty. It is recognition. Recognition of each other's scars. Recognition of shared mistakes. Recognition that leaving would not erase the past, and staying would not magically heal it. There is no triumphant ending. There is no declaration that everything is finally right. Instead, there is something quieter. 2 people aging side by side, no longer pretending to be perfect, no longer demanding that love save them from themselves. They share routines, memories, and silences that no longer feel threatening. Silence, once the enemy, becomes neutral because it is no longer hiding anything. The transcript closes with a lesson rather than a conclusion. Love does not fail because people change. It fails because they are afraid to change together. Forgiveness is not the end of pain. It is the decision to give pain meaning instead of letting it destroy what remains. At 80, the narrator does not claim wisdom. He claims clarity. He understands that happiness was never applause or admiration. It was the courage to be seen without armor. And so the story ends not with a confession meant to shock, but with one meant to warn. Silence is the most dangerous lie in any relationship. It grows quietly, feeds on fear, and eventually replaces love without anyone noticing. If there's one thing this life has taught him, it is this: you could survive fame, illness, and loss. But if you survive by hiding, you may wake up one day beside someone you love and realize you never truly let them know you at all.